Conjunctions. We are not singing the song. Look at me. We are not singing the song. Xandria Waters is saying no. But I'll teach you about conjunctions. We're going to start with because. Let's start with the first sentence. 자전거 바퀴가 배쳐서 늦었어요. I'm going to break the sentence down for you, and I'm going to see if you can translate this sentence before I tell you what it means. That's what I like to do with my students. So, 자전거, bike. And I mean, like, pedaling bike, not like a motorcycle, because that would have been autobike. Here we have 자전거, 바퀴가. 바퀴가. All right, so that is going to be wheel. 받쳤어. Kitty. 받쳤어. All right. We have soul. That is our because form. And 빠지다 would be like to lose or even to get rid of. In this case, it's to lose. 늦었어요. All right, so 늦다 is to be late. All right, I'm going to give you a couple seconds. Bet you can translate it. Okay. I am late because the bike wheel came off. That is the sentence. 자전거 바퀴가 받쳐서 늦었어요. Okay. So is our because form. Now, I will call these because forms, the ones that we're going to talk about today. I prefer to think of them as is why. So in the kitty. All right. In the English translation of these, okay, I am late because the bike wheel came off. We typically have the consequence and then the condition. I am late because the bike wheel came off. Whereas you can see in the Korean sentence, we have the condition and then the consequence. So, you can rewrite the sentence as the bike wheel came off is why I'm late. I prefer to think is why when I come across any one of these because forms. And of course, for simplicity's sake, I will still refer to them as because forms, but the sentence structure, it just makes it more comfortable. I have what I call third column translation. 자전거 바퀴가 받쳐서 늦었어요. I would write that Korean sentence normal size, like how you do. Then I would write really, really tiny, the bike wheel came off is why I'm late. I would write that super, super tiny on the very, very far right edge of the paper. And I will write that there as a fail-safe, just so I can check, okay, this is what they're saying. In the middle, I call this the third column translation. I rewrite the sentence, still in English, but in a way that better reflects what is going on in the Korean sentence. So I would rewrite this, the bike wheel came off is why I'm late. And I would put that maybe in like a medium size writing, And that way it will catch my eye quicker than like what I would call the Netflix translation, the close enough translation, the essentially this is what they're saying translation, which, Netflix, Hulu, they don't really give us a lot of credit, us Americans. I mean, come on. So is our because form, or is why. So you're going to use that in certain situations. You would use that often to explain an emotion. I left the party because I was sad. I went to the hospital because my head hurt. Or in a situation like this, like you're urgently explaining yourself. You don't want to get fired. You don't understand. I'm late because the bike wheel came off. like you're urgently trying to explain something. So there's a huge, strong connection between cause and effect, what goes on in the first part of the sentence and the end of the sentence. You're showing that strong relationship with the soul form. You cannot use soul, if it's being used as because, you cannot use soul in questions. You cannot use them in suggestions or commands. You can only use soul in statements when you mean to use them as because or is why. We'll get more into that in a little bit. Let's move on to our next sentence. Dal demone josoga bakwinda. You tell me what this means. Dal, if you remember from our small vocab practice, this was a few videos ago. When we went over planets, body parts, dal means moon. The native Korean word for moon. Wol would have been the hanja. Daemun. Daemun is our because form. You often see a after it, similar to like a location word, a time word, at that location, at that time. Daemun e. Josu ga. All right, let's ignore ga. That's just a subject marker. Josu. Tides. Bakwinda. Okay, so bakwida is to change. Bakwinda, we have a little nian added to the second to last syllable. That is a plain form conjugation. We'll get more into that in a later video. Just TLDR, this is just a statement. You're not addressing anyone in particular. That's what a plain form sentence does. So, dal demone josoga bakwinda. The tides change because of the moon. Or the moon is why the tides change. If you want to rewrite it in that third column, that is a good option. You don't have to use the third column trick or whatever. This is just what I did for like the first year or so when I was first studying. It cut down on on my in-head translation. It got me a few steps closer to thinking like a Korean speaker. And eventually, after like a year or so of that, it got to the point where I could just like do those mental gymnastics in my head, and it kind of got a little more automatic for me, so I didn't have to do that anymore. But as a beginner, I highly recommend getting that practice in. Then when you go back and look back at these sentences, you're like, what does this mean? You'll catch the third column translation, like you'll review with that first, and you're like, what does this exactly mean? And then you have that little fail safe, like what I call the Netflix translation again. When I rewrite certain sentences, sometimes they end up sounding like Yoda. So be it. Daemun. Daemun is our because form this time. A little different from soul. Daemun has a bit more of a neutral tone. So just like all the because forms, sure, it still shows some relationship between cause and effect, but it's not as visceral, not as strong as the soul. And in this sentence, you're not explaining the result of something done out of an emotion or something done out of a physical condition. You're not fighting to stay employed. None of that. You're just being like, hey, this is what the moon does to the tides. This is just nature. I'm just explaining it to you. So daemun is perfectly fine to use with questions, commands, suggestions. Those kinds of sentences that soul is not allowed to be used in, daemun is fine with. We'll talk more about daemun in a little bit. This one's a little long. Hang in there with me. 교차로를 쭉 걸어가서 어떤 고객들이 있는지 보자. Before I translate this for you, we're going to break it down. Maybe you can figure it out before I finish breaking it down for you, huh? Let's ignore the object marker right now. 교차로. 교차로. Intersection. Jok, well, it means a few different things, but in this case, jok, it's going to mean like straight. So like straight through the intersection. Korakoso. This is interesting because what we're actually doing is we are combining two verb stems together. So kora, this is actually conjugated from kutta, kuda, to walk. And then we've combined it with kara, kara, which is to go. Okay, so we've combined those two verb stems. Now, this is kind of interesting because kara, to go, and ora, to come, they frequently pair with a lot of motion verbs. You know, to walk, to run, to skateboard, to roll, whatever greases your engine. So, I mean, they're not going to pair with a lot of verbs, but usually the motion verbs they will pair with. And we got so again. Okay, let's put a pin in that. We're going to circle back to it. Ottan. Ottan, basically it's going to be like what kind, which kind, that sort of thing. We'll have a later lesson about this sort of thing in a little. It's going to be a while, but we'll get there. Kagetori. Okay, let's ignore the rest of this, just the first two syllables. Kage. What does kage mean? Give you a second. Kage means store. We've got dur. All right, so dur, TLDR, it's a plural. It's how we plural things. It's how we plural things around here. Then we got E. Okay, so stores with a subject marker. So, kage duri. Now we have inunji. All right, let's ignore G for a second. Inun. That's just simply ita, but kind of being used as an adjective a little bit. Inun. We're saying inun as a way to describe these stores, the stores that are there. Because ita means to be, to have, to exist. So, kageturi inun, the stores that are there. Ji is, not gonna lie, it's gonna be meaning a few different things. It's one of those Swiss Army syllables. You'll see them in negative sentences. You'll see G space anta, or however you want to conjugate it. For now, this is not a negative sentence. This is G space puta. G in this sentence is going to mean unknown information. You see G a lot in sentences that translate as weather. I don't know whether it's going to rain. I don't know whether I'll pass the test. I don't know whether this job will hire me, that kind of thing. It frequently translates as weather, but G does not mean weather. It just simply means a piece of unknown information. We got G, we've got spaced, putza. Okay, so that verb stem, bu. What is that verb stem for? Boda. To see, to watch. To look, to see, to watch. Boda. Well, get rid of the da, add the ja. Now we have a suggestion. Okay, so this whole sentence, this whole thing is going to translate as, let's walk straight through the intersection and see what kind of stores there are. That's what this whole thing is. I want to draw your attention to soul. Okay. So, remember back when I did this whole song and dance about how soul cannot be used with suggestions? Did I lie to you? Sort of, kind of, not really. Here's what's going on. In this sentence, soul is being used to mean because or is why. In this sentence, soul's only job, really, is to show a strong connection between what goes on in the first part of the sentence and the second part of the sentence. That's its main job. Sometimes that does translate as because, sure. But when it's not being used to say because or is why, when it's instead being used to say so that or in order to, and there are ways to say so that in order to in other sentences, we'll get to that in a later video. But soul kind of has that feeling. There is that strong connection because you cannot see what stores there are if you don't first cross that intersection. So that cause and effect. Things are a little different when soul is being used in that way. So you may see sentences that include soul but end in a suggestion. I am fixing to turn into a pumpkin. We're going to have to turn this into like a two-parter. I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.